the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. From 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Thank you for joining us. Today is April 24th, 2018. The time goes so fast. It's just amazing, isn't it? It's 8 o'clock in the morning here in Eugene, Oregon. Looks like it's going to be a clear blue day again. Hopefully they won't spray us with aluminum and lithium today. What a sad state of affairs. So I'm sort of winging it today. In fact, I am winging it today because I had my guest, Heidi Lambert, scheduled for this morning, and she called me last minute. There was an emergency with her work. They had an early morning meeting that she had to go to and could not miss. So we will definitely be hearing from Heidi Lambert. You know, Heidi is the woman who grew up and lived and worked near Hanford. Her dad was a Hanford worker. And she only moved away, I think she said, in 2010. So that's when she started really thinking about what it was doing to her life. And yes, they have had a lot of family problems. And not only that, she's had a lot of issues because she speaks out. So she gets a lot of pushback, much like our friend Glenn Woodford out near Paducah, Kentucky, who basically appears to me, I mean, I don't know, I haven't seen his YouTube videos, I haven't seen that he has put any out, but I think he was pretty much silenced by the trauma of living in Paducah, Kentucky with his own personal family. They were having medical issues, and then being accosted by people there, telling him to stop protesting, or his life could be threatened, or his children. That's what we're dealing with. And I'm sort of glad that I have a little bit of time to, I guess, pontificate or think or ponder these thoughts. I listen to Dane Wigington's show, as I'm sure many of our listeners do, who is also on this channel, Geoengineering Watch, and he has geoengineeringwatch.org. Really, really great website, great show. It's where I first started understanding what those lines in the sky were. I remember when I first came to Eugene 14 years ago, you know, I'm from Los Angeles, lived there most of my life. I mean, 100% of the time. I left in my 20s. I went to go live in the French Quarter in New Orleans. And then I moved to Jacksonville with my ex-husband. Shortly thereafter, I came back to California with my two kids. And I lived there my whole life. So I literally thought that San Onofre was an observatory. I didn't live in the community. I lived way north near Redondo Beach. And I grew up in the LA basin, and I really had not much reason to stop around there. It looked like an observatory. I didn't know. I mean, I think I speak for a lot of Americans that we just think things are okay and we don't really ask a lot of questions. We figured that we trust the military because we have people that we love that are in the military. And so we trust them. And so by extension, we trust the people they trust. And that's how this happens. That's how this whole thing came about. This morning when I found out that Heidi was not going to be on the radio show, I started looking around for something to talk about, right? And in relation to this thing about Dane Wigington, because this is my question, I'm going to go back to this primary question that I'm going to sort of weave in and out here. It's the nuclear lie, right? We are living, the age of fission is really part of what they want that scenario to be, is that we just accept it. That we forget the time when there was no nuclear radioactivity. We ignore the chemical lines in the sky doing something, creating clouds and God knows what, and dropping down on us. Aluminum, lithium. It's the Manhattan Project secrecy. I mean, how many times do we hear a story in the news that say, oh, well, this town was part of the Manhattan Project, blah, 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 blah. They dished out money big time throughout the United States on these secrecy programs, on building the foundation of creating the secret government, on creating you're on a need-to-know basis, and most people don't need to know government. I mean, this is what we're living in the Age of Fission radio show, folks. This is why I'm on the radio. I have the show 5 days a week, because if something happens with Jerome's schedule, I'm picking it up and we're rearranging it all. So the days may change here. That's why we didn't want to change the dates. Jerome and I are pretty solid partners on this radio show, I believe. And so he's got 2 days, I've got 2, and hopefully we can still share Fridays. But now that he's got a job, a job, his schedule may change. But both of us feel very strongly about the lies, the complicity, how did we get ourselves into this thing? And I'm really grateful that Jerome Hebert is sharing this show with me, because he has a more scientific point of view, although I have to say I have suggested that he needs to read John Goffman. It's pretty obvious. This morning I saw a story. This was a very interesting story when I was looking around. They're talking about how in Fukushima, the biggest health problem among the elderly is not, listen to how they're framing this, is not radiation, it's diabetes. Interestingly enough, John Goffman's work, and I have several of the technical books for any person who wants to read them, because I buy them so that I can give them away to people who have an interest, who would not order them. All you have to do is send me an email and say, hey, give me that book if you have it. There is someone down in Australia, I think it's Karen North, and I'm going to call her by name because she's a pretty good activist from what I can understand down there. She asked me to find her a couple of books, and it was like $70 just to mail her the books. I'm like, really? I couldn't do that. I couldn't spring for $70 again to people that I barely know. I think I've been through that routine. Anyways, but Karen, those are great books. This John Goffman book, it's called Low-Level Exposure to Radiation, Human Health Effects to Low Level, and it's his journal. It shows his scientific studies. It shows his dates, the studies that he's done, and his conclusion is one of the first health effects negative health effects of radioactivity is diabetes. Now, is that just lost information? Are our scientists suffering from what the rest of us, activists or keyboard activists or baby activists, I guess, the people that aren't respected by the activists who have changed their lives activists, us, I mean, our thing is we lack the information. Because, honestly, coming in from it completely blindsided, I trusted our elected officials 100%. That's what we have the government for, to oversee these things, to make sure they're protecting our population, our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is so outrageous that we find ourselves now sitting in the effing toilet. We're now having to live in the toilet. People in Flint, Michigan now have to accept brown water. People in Oklahoma and in Missouri now have to accept contaminated water that they can't even see. Although in Oklahoma they did see it, just like in Flint, Michigan. And they're being told, sorry. We have a long way to go, folks. And how do we get I personally am sick of the details. I can read you stories about this. But even if we just keep reporting it, at what point, are we really going to have to just take to the streets and say, it's stopping? In order for me to make an appointment with Peter DeFazio yesterday, I found out because Louisa Hamachek and I have decided that we're going to talk to all of our elected officials, the federal officials, and talk to Pete DeFazio, our congressman here, and say that we need the Columbia Generating Station closed down, and closed down now, because it is a danger to humanity. All humanity on the planet, because it is an operating nuclear power plant less than 15 miles away from Hanford. And Hanford, by the way, is in the same state where they keep our nuclear arsenal. Now, there's a brilliant idea, isn't it? In case our enemies wanted to attack our submarine nuclear arsenals right off of Seattle, you think they don't have a big target there? What if they decided to go a little deviant and hit Hanford? For real. Even if it wasn't anything gigantic, could you imagine what that would do? Or, for that matter, the Columbia Generating Station. It is completely untenable that all of us are accepting this. It's just, Heidi Lambert and I, we generally talk about how to eat right, like the idea behind we're going to not eat certain foods because it has radioactivity in it. And Heidi is like, well, it's all got radioactivity. It's cumulative, though. If you eat food that is grown directly where there's radioactivity, but most of the apples, a lot of the apples in the United States, let's put it that way, at least in the Northwest, are right around from where they told us last year that there was a plutonium leak. Poofed away, we have no idea. Mile-high trucks of plutonium, not mile high, but what they say, several hundred feet high, 10 feet high mounds. Whoosh. Couldn't control it, so they were watering it down. This is, this is a thing about all these facilities. When I first got into this, I did not actually think there was that many people who were paying attention to it because it never makes the news. And when you search the news, you have to just kind of dig. Like, look at this. This article. This is an article, The Biggest Health Risk After Fukushima, Diabetes by James Watkins. OZ.com, OZY. March This is April 16th, 2018. So just a couple weeks ago. It's pretty current. I think I have time to read most of it. But for me, I'm going to give you this information, but keep in mind, this is why I had to talk about it before I could read it. John Goffman told us one of the first negative effects, it's easily documented, is increase in diabetes, unexpected diabetes. It is from radiation. It's not, a change, because the tone of this whole article, as you will see, is going to say it's because of their lifestyle. But let's read this. March 2011. The Arab Spring was in full force, the Libyan civil war intensifying, and then, on the 11th day of the month, the fourth most powerful earthquake ever recorded hit off the coast of Japan, generating a tsunami that ended up causing thousands of casualties. But news coverage quickly focused on a new threat, a potential meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, which had been directly in the tsunami's path. As the three core meltdowns led to a release of nuclear material only second to that of Chernobyl. What are you talking about? Second. It has surpassed it. 140,000 residents within 12 miles of the plant were evacuated for fear of radiation exposure. All of Japan's nuclear plants were shut down, though some have since come back online, and countries as far away as Germany took turns bashing nuclear power. But 7 years on, the true impact of Fukushima disaster on former residents has been very different from what everyone feared. Or I will add in, feared, but actually ought to have expected had they known the real risk of radioactivity on the human body. There's big bold letters in the middle of this, so I'm going to read this. It says, the Fukushima disaster reduced life expectancy far more due to increased diabetes rates than due to cancer caused by radiation by a factor of 6. That is caused by radiation, sir. Do your homework. And among the elderly, diabetes trumps radiation as a threat to life expectancy by a factor of 33. That is radiation, and it's not radiation, it's radioactive contamination that we're talking about. So this is the hard part about this. The people that are telling us these stories have not read the books. He has not read John Goffman's books, I guarantee it. This gentleman, I'm going to send him an email and tell him he should read. I'll offer to send it to him. That's according to September 17th study using 6 years of public health checkup data from Minamosoma and Soma, 2 towns closest to the power plant. This is how the nuclear industry lies to the people and is going to really decimate the population of these towns. To be fair, the reduction in life expectancy is small in both cases, 0.04 years because of diabetes and 0.007 years because of radiation for the general population, but the gap is substantial. This is just infuriating. Doesn't it just make you mad, you guys? According to the researchers, it not only speaks to the fact that the negative effects of radiation were mercifully small, a meta-analysis by the UN, who we can surely trust, agency of dozens of studies found no deterministic health effect due to radiation exposure, and none are expected. Thank you, IAEA, for those words. But also shows the importance of taking into account indirect health issues caused by lifestyle disruption following a major disaster. No, sir, it's caused by radioactive contamination. Increase in diabetes is a direct result of being exposed to radioactive contamination. So now it's on the air and on the YouTubes, and I want to thank people for going to our YouTube channel, finding today's show, and putting it out on the universe, because people need to understand that increase in diabetes has been historically proven by John Goffman and goes under every single study. Increase in diabetes is one of the first things that happens when you are exposed to radioactive contamination, especially a cumulative low level, which is what the study was about. Wow. So people are just being fed up. It's their lifestyle that's causing this. It's their problem, right? Blame the victim, like the abusers that they are. The main health effect of the nuclear disaster has been the social disruption caused by the evacuation, says study author Dr. Masaharu Sobukara from the Department of Radiation Protection at Minnesota Municipal General Hospital in Fukushima. Of course, they have these doctors complicit who have not done their homework. He and several other researchers have published multiple papers on the disaster's secondary health effects. Oh, wow. This is exactly what John Goffman says it causes, identifying increasing rates and severity of illnesses such as diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, and depression, all of which John Goffman said were direct effects of radioactive contamination, although the depression was diagnosed, I think, as schizophrenia. An increase in schizophrenia. The population of Minnesota City, Sakabura says, fell from 70,000 before the disaster to just 8,000 and has since recovered to just above 50. Oh, wow. Those who remained are overwhelmingly elderly with family breakup, job losses, and community disruption, leading to widespread social isolation. Many are still living in temporary housing. Other studies have shown that for the vulnerable residents, such as the elderly, the forced emergency evacuations were far more harmful than staying put, with conditions of cold, inadequate accommodation, and uncertain access to food and medicines. 25% of elderly residents died within 90 days of the evacuation, notes Sobukara. Well, how do we know it wasn't from... This is where the nuclear industry, you guys, we are living in the age of the Manhattan Project still. Let's just everybody keep telling the same lies. It's the Stepford Wives all over again. This story just makes my blood boil. Hang on, let me grab some water. Thanks for that very long wait with no music. Sorry about that. Okay, he's got big headlines in this blog again. The biggest threat from major disaster isn't always the most direct. It is in the case of radioactive contamination, sir. For real, I object to that statement. When you are exposed to radioactive contamination, the biggest threat from that major disaster is radioactive contamination. Period. That's what makes it so completely unique. It is not like the coal ashes that sludge into your water that you can just move away from if you had to. Or it goes into your water and you move and you live in a different place. It's the same thing. You have to do the same thing here. You cannot live near radioactivity. 50,000 people have gone back there. It's so outrageous. Indeed, similar effects have been found in previous research, says Dr. Vivian Fonesca, Assistant Dean for Clinical Research at Tulane University in New Orleans, who conducted research following Hurricane Katrina showing that diabetes management goes haywire for those already with the disease when a major disaster strikes. Well, especially in Katrina. Give me a break. That's actually true, though, because people are not prepared with big diseases. You know, they need their medicines. Conditions to such as diabetes is very susceptible to lifestyle changes like diet and exercise, let alone devastating social shock of mass evacuation. A recent research across medicine has increasingly expressed the importance of the social determinants on human health as well as the linkages between physical and mental health. Yes, who would have thought keeping your body fit and moving helps your brain function and helps your heart function? We are indeed living in the dumbed down times of the world. This is why, honestly, I think I'm so grateful to Dame Wigington going back to this original question. Who started the secrecy? That's what this story is about. This is how the secrecy is continued. This is how it is propagated, because inside this thoughtfully written blog is a bunch of misinformation. Clear conclusions are difficult to reach, though. Not so. The health impacts of the disaster have been really complex, and yet we don't know the mediating factor. Was the evacuation mainly to blame, or the stress, or the social isolation? Let's don't look at radioactivity as the blame, and let's don't look at the work by Dr. John Goffman and Dr. Arthur Tamplin and Dr. Linus Pauling of the 50s and 60s, who unequivocally confirmed that one of the first things that happens to people who are exposed to radioactivity and low-level radioactivity is they develop at the onset of diabetes and or schizophrenia, very often. Jeez Louise, these people make me mad. Explains Claire Leopold, a PhD candidate at the University of Edinburgh who's researching the social determinants of health in Fukushima. Oh, Miss Leopold's going to get a little letter from me. And indeed, it's incredibly difficult to get comparative data from before and after. There's a lot of unrecognized diabetes out there, said Fonesca, leading to the degree of bias in the statistics when residents were meticulously tested after the disaster. Blame the victim. How many people out there had diabetes that we just did not know about? Especially the Japanese. You know how filthy their diet is, right? Can you believe this woman? This is what now, is that coercion? Is that collusion? James Watkins, the author, I think he has misinformation, and I am actually going to send him an email. That said, the same overscreening effects apply to studying radiation with thyroid nodules and thyroid cancer, often going undetected for years, notes Leopold. While Fonesca is clear that conditions such as diabetes worsens in the case of disaster, he suggests that boiling that down to specific numbers of lost life expectancy in years is a huge extrapolation, a huge extrapolation of what can be reliably proved. Wow. Can be reliably proved. Here we go. Nevertheless, it's clear that the biggest threat from major disasters isn't always the most direct. Researchers in Fukushima hope that the conclusions will lead to the development of better evacuation policy and disaster preparedness. Disaster, big and small, occur all the time, says Fonesca, and the people with diabetes and other lifestyle illnesses need to be ready for it. James Watkins. Well, I appreciate James Watkins writing this story and putting it out there because there's very little information about it, but quite interesting how the dumbing down and if I personally had not read John Goffman's books on my YouTube channel, I probably would not have known that fact. And that's why it's called Poison Power. It's an older book. Its science is sound, and it is really good. His other book, Population Control Through Nuclear Pollution, and that is also by John Goffman and Arthur Tamplin. Those two books are, the first one, I mean, they're just outstanding books and talking about how, the exposure, what it really is going to do to us. John Goffman didn't just write books just because he felt like it to make money. He did it to, have us stop this stuff. And have we been successful at all? No. No, we have not. Not only that, they've gotten more bold with the chemicals in the air, the lines in the sky. Like, that is outrageous. I would love to dig in. I don't know how to begin. I wonder if Dane Wigington, if he understands that connection. I heard it on his radio show. He was talking about how the geoengineering, that whole program of in the sky, the whole thing of them creating clouds and doing all of that started just about the same time that the nuclear industry started. That is not a coincidence, no doubt. Can't be. And here we are with people attempting to make a reasonable blog, but, drawing the wrong conclusion because they have not read the facts. I mean, science doesn't change. It was pretty strong, suggestive data. I'm going to move on and give you guys some reports on Fukushima because I think we need to keep talking about Fukushima. This thing is still going on, and it is still threatening everything. Like this whole thing of the Manhattan Project secrecy, Nancy Fowles has worked, and we've heard her being interviewed on Nuclear Hot Seat. And we have men like Tom Carpenter, who works for a Hanford Challenge, people who have been engaged in their work lives, sacrificing their careers where they could have gone on to make so much more money by now as attorneys, and yet they dedicated their lives to fighting the nuclear liars in the courts for pittance, relatively for pittance. Most people get angry at attorneys because they have a decent living. But I mean, what they could have made as opposed to what they did made. I think of Nancy Fowles, who I don't know her life. From what I understand, she just lived near a nuclear power plant. And all of a sudden her life changed. Just like Libby Halevi, all of a sudden her life changed. Just like us. Fukushima happened and our lives have changed. And that thing that made our lives change is still ongoing, folks. 7 years later. We're in year 8. 2011 is, now we are year 8. After March 11th, it has been ignored for almost they're going into the 8th year. And now they're talking about moving people back in. What did that story say? The people who've moved back there with diabetes, the elderly, and the broken up families, they've moved back there and they're saying it's from the lifestyle change. No, it's not. It's from the radioactivity. That is an insane idea to move people back into that little town. Where is our humanity? I mean, at what point are we going to I don't know, the information. See, we're living in the information age, but how many people have really read John Goffman's book, Poison Power, which was the definitive book on it? And his science has not been discredited, much to the lies of the nuclear industry. He was drummed out of the industry, he and Arthur Tamplin, because they would not say that radioactivity was harmless. I'm going to read this headline. I don't know if I can read the whole story. 7 years on, radioactive water at Fukushima plant still flowing into the ocean. Study finds. Study finds. Listen to this. This is from the Japan Times. Wow. So this is straight full-on mainstream media, as they say. This is pretty amazing. Let me see if I can find the date on this story. March 29th, 2018. More than 7 years after the March 11th More than 7 years after the March 2011 Fukushima nuclear crisis, radioactive water is continuing to flow into the Pacific Ocean from the crippled number 1 plant at a rate of around 2 billion becquerels a day, a study found. 2 billion becquerels a day from plant number 1. 2 billion becquerels a day from plant number 1. 2 billion becquerels a day from plant number 1, a study has found. The amount of leaking cesium-137 has decreased, oh thank goodness, from some 30 billion becquerels in 2013. Michio Ayuma, a professor at the Institute of Environmental Radioactivity at Fukushima University, said in his study, which was presented Wednesday at an academic conference in Osaka. Wow. The study said the concentration of radiation, 0.02 becquerel per liter of seawater found in samples collected near the coastal town of 8 kilometers south of the number 1 plant, is at a level that does not affect the local fishing industry. Wow. The radioactive water is generated in a process to cool melted nuclear fuel at 3 damaged reactors at the complex. The reactors experienced core meltdowns after the March 2011 earthquake and tsunami. Wow, listen to that statement again, you guys. The radioactive water is generated in a process to cool melted nuclear fuel at three damaged reactors at the complex. 3 damaged reactors are in nuclear meltdown still. They haven't just been stopped. That is an ongoing disaster. The reactors experienced core meltdowns after the March 2011 earthquake and tsunami. Core meltdowns, 3 of them, still in core meltdown, needing to have water poured on it nonstop so they don't blow up. It can be assumed that there is a path from the complex to the ocean through which contaminated water flows, Ayama said. It can be assumed. The water accumulates at the basement of the buildings at the site after being used to cool the melted fuel. So it does not get filtered. It just, everything else that it goes into. All of the other contaminants. Tokyo Electric Holding Company, the operator of the Fukushima complex, has been trying to prevent contaminated water from increasing within the facility by building an underground ice wall, which has failed, in an effort to block groundwater. It has also built a seawall aimed at preventing contaminated water from entering the ocean. Yeah, fat lot of good all that's done. Wow. So that story leaves me with the same thought that I come back to. We are living in the Manhattan Project. We are accepting the secrecy of the Manhattan Project. We are accepting, we're just like, you actually have to look for stories for Fukushima. Like this story, it doesn't just pop up. They just say these things like, oh yeah, we're pouring 2 billion becquerels a day. That's not that big a deal. Come on, you guys. 2 billion becquerels a day of radioactivity from one leaking facility on the world. There's lots of them around the world. Come on. Everybody else is doing it. This isn't that bad. And don't worry, it's only 0.02 becquerels of a liter found in the seawater of cesium-137, which is one of the, fastest, most, diluted. There's not much of it in there anyways. Let's don't count the other stuff that's in there. Yeah. So I heard that song, we're on a planet that has a problem. So I've been singing it wrong. I guess this was a song that came from the Occupy movement, because I heard the Eugene Peace Choir singing the real song. So I'm going to make an effort to get a little video of them back on my YouTube channel and maybe make that. I've very intentionally stopped being on my YouTube channel, I do have to say. It has been sort of intentional. I'm just sort of like, it feels as if whatever we put out there is just going to be manipulated. And does it go anywhere? Has anybody actually listened to John Goffman's book on my YouTube channel when I read 2 books? I've read scientific studies. I read the radiation, the human experimentation, the oral history of human experimentation, and it was an oral history by Dr. John Goffman, and I read it on my YouTube channel. It explains that the American government did not get permission from anybody. When, I think her name was Mabel O'Leary, Secretary of Energy at the time that this oral history was conducted in the late 60s, early 70s, is because she discovered that all the papers regarding their nuclear testing and all that stuff was just shoved in boxes, scattered in cardboard boxes all over the country. It was just disheveled, as if you just shuffled the cards. So, and to get some order in her mind, she could not find one signature on a single piece of paper that gave permission from anyone in the government to experiment on human beings with radioactivity, which it was doing. So she had this oral history that came to me. Actually, I ordered a book. I just said I ordered these books to give out. I had ordered a set of books that I found on Abe's Books, where I get them. You can buy them. Any of these books, go to abesbooks.com, or you can go to Amazon. Amazon has a lot of really good used books. I know people hate Amazon, but it does have the used books, especially John Goffman's books. You can get them for $3 or $4 or $5. So that's worth having and to give out to people. That's what I think, because people need to read this information. I know Americans have gotten lazy about reading, but 15 minutes a day will give you the information you need. You don't need to read for hours at end. Read a little bit. Get yourself accustomed to reading, because the information is on paper and it will shock you. It shocked me. That's why I read it on my YouTube channel. I wanted people to hear it. But I mean, at a certain point, this is why the activists give up and go away, or they start talking to each other, you know. These little activist communities will just only talk to each other and not reach out to people who aren't as active as they want them to be. People don't get as active because things aren't changing. Those old tactics, we have got to get clever and figure out how to stop this. Or can we? I mean, maybe we can't stop it. Maybe what we need to do is just hunker down and wait for the disasters. Because that is basically, we're on that trajectory for sure. It's a short list. I mean, how many of us living across the United States of America and actually around the world wake up to a beautiful day, a blue sky, cold or hot, it doesn't matter. And then by the afternoon, we see the airplanes in the sky, and then we see those wispy clouds that are created, and then you see that brown fog around the horizon. That's the chemicals settling down on us. That's the life that we are expected to accept in the age of fission. I personally reject that. And I think what we ought to do is focus our minds on the solutions. How are we going to stop this? Think of the best case scenarios. If everybody thinks of the best case scenario, and we're all thinking of the best case scenario and the inventions, that's why I like Shaziz, because Shaziz has thought of some ideas. Larry Woods thought of an idea that would get us off the grid immediately. I mean, I think Larry Woods is still looking for investors, but I think that's coming. So we might have some transformational energy products, that will make the world different. But what good will that do when we're living in the toilet? I mean, for real, when the world is so contaminated right now. One nuclear power plant at Fukushima is dumping in 2 billion becquerels a day. Lord, that's a lot of becquerels. It's been 8 years. That's now what they're pouring into it. Imagine how hot it was 7 years ago. So that's all around our coast and what's going into the ocean. And we're expected to say, oh yeah, don't worry, keep eating that fish because fish is so good for you. Oh my gosh, you guys. There has to be a connection. Listen to this date. This is April 24th, 2018, Tuesday. Prensa Latina, Agencia Informativa Latinoamericana. And this is Plenglish, PLENGLISH.com. Nuclear hospital reopens next to Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. A hospital from the Japanese town Futaba next to the nuclear power plant Fukushima 1, the one giving out 32 billion becquerels at 2 billion becquerels a day, reopened Monday after 7 years inactive caused by the nuclear accident provoked by the earthquake in 2011. State broadcaster NHK disclosures since the disaster, inhabitants from Futaba and Tomoka towns are suffering from the lack of surgical specialty and 24-hour health system. The installation of 2 floors has 30 beds for hospitalization, internal medicine departments, as well as emergency wards where 21 specialists work, and a heliport to transfer to other hospitals patients who need advanced medical treatment. Thank God. Well, they're moving them in. They do need a hospital. The earthquake and the subsequent tsunami damaged the Fukushima nuclear plant reactors in 2011, considered the worst catastrophe of its type in the modern era. That is a true statement. Decontamination activities continue in the area. Now there is a factual piece of journalism, which I can say I really appreciate on this issue. This is just, I pulled up, I wanted us to talk about this. I wanted us to know about, since Heidi called me last second and said she had this emergency meeting, I'm like, I could go on talking about the stupid stuff that is, going to ruin our political system. I guess our political system has been ruined a long time. We're just seeing it. It's kind of like we're having our Scooby-Doo moment with our political system, just like we did when Fukushima happened about the nuclear industry. We're like, say what? It's what? It's not safe? I mean, I don't know. It's kind of bizarre. What's bizarre is that we just sort of, how effective was the Manhattan Project if all of us are still buying into it? The secrecy, the lies, the manipulation. The let's don't talk about it. Better not talk about it. We better decide for the good of the country we're not going to talk about it. That's for the good of the country. Let's mind you, it's for the good of the country. The country, not the people. Not our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Excuse me. So there's another story by The Sun in England, and let's see what the date of this one is. So I pulled up some quick stories because this, I think it's really important that we keep talking about this. 2 billion becquerels a day, folks, from number 1 reactor. 2 billion. Daily, nonstop, 2 billion every day. 2 billion becquerels of radioactivity going into the Pacific Ocean every day, nonstop. That if it was a one-time event, we could go, oh, okay, that's really bad, but it's not so bad. 2 billion becquerels a day, every day, nonstop. We got a problem, folks. We got a serious problem. We need some brains. We need the scientists to stop with their, well, we don't know what's causing this. Doing, doing, doing. Yes, they do. And they need to really get down to science, real science. Stop excluding stuff. Okay, listen to this one. This is the sun. As we love the sun. 19 April 2018. Radioactive pigs. Japan covering up Fukushima nuclear danger zone radiation levels and blackmailing evacuees to return to radiated areas, swarming with radioactive pigs and monkeys. 3 reactors went into meltdown after the 2011 Japanese tsunami in the worst accident since Chernobyl, leaving an apocalyptic vision of ghost towns and overflown wildernesses, and scared residents refused to return. Japan is lying to the world about nuclear-ravaged Fukushima's recovery while forcing terrified evacuees to return to their radioactive homes, it is claimed. More than 7 years after the nuclear catastrophe rocked the world, many of the 154,000 people who fled their homes have not returned, and the towns remain deserted. There's a picture of a radioactive boar standing at a street corner. It's kind of funny, facing the camera in the true Sun fashion. You know how Sun likes to give us the real truth. This is the sad part. See, this story, these facts are real. But they put it in the Sun, which is basically a scandalous rag from the UK. But it does speak the truth. Thousands of irradiated wild boars and monkeys roam around while poorly paid and protected decontamination workers scrub homes, schools, and shops down ready for people to come home. Chilling footage taken inside the evacuated areas of Fukushima City and Koriyama lay bare the disaster that unfolded after the earthquake, measuring 9.01 on the momentum magnitude scale, struck off the coast of Japan on March 11, 2011. But it was following the 50-foot tsunami that damaged reactors at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. This led to the evacuation of thousands of people in the 12-mile exclusion zone, with roads guarded by roadblocks and officials in protective gear. I've got a bunch of pictures. Now there's a big campaign underway to make people return, but residents, campaigners, and experts believe it is not safe. They accuse the Japanese authorities of wanting to allay public fears over the nuclear power by downplaying the dire consequences of the leak. Propaganda videos showing the remarkable recovery of Fukushima have been spread by the government on its social media accounts. If you guys haven't seen this, go to @JapanGov on Twitter, @JapanGov. Since the Great East Japan earthquake 2011, Fukushima has been working towards a bright future. Strict safety standards and monitoring means that food from the prefecture is enjoyed all over Japan. See Fukushima's amazing recovery video in this video. That was their tweet on February 28th, 2018. Oh my gosh. So then they've got a ton of pictures. They laid out a ton of pictures in the sun. But senior nuclear specialist Sean Burney from Greenpeace Japan said the nuclear nightmare continues. He said they are not telling the whole truth either to the 127 million people of Japan or to the rest of the world about the radiation risks in the most contaminated areas of Fukushima. The nuclear crisis is not over. We are only in year 7 of an accident that will continue to threaten public health and the environment for decades and well into the next century. That's an understatement, sir. Attempts by the government and the nuclear industry to communicate that it is safe and it's over are a deliberate deception. And there's tons of pictures again. And I'm not going to go through that one. Most of Japan's power plants shut in the wake of Fukushima nuclear disaster, but in 2015, the Prime Minister announced plans to restart reactors because the economy needs cheap energy and using fossil fuel risks huge carbon emission fines. Now 5 of them are back on, and it's aimed at having 12 in use by 2025. Mr. Burney said, if they can create the illusion of the region that has recovered from the nuclear accident, they think it will reduce public opposition. But meanwhile, the crisis continues at the Fukushima plant. He said, the massive ice wall built at the nuclear plant to stop contamination of the groundwater is a symbol of this failure and deception. This is no Game of Thrones fantasy, but the reality of a nuclear disaster that knows no end. Today he says that there are areas of Fukushima where radiation levels could give a person maximum annual recommended dose within a week. He said, this is of particular concern with regards to poorly paid decontamination workers, thousands of whom have been involved in attempts to decontaminate radiation around people's homes, along roads, and in narrow strips of forest. Mr. Burney said the government claims decontamination has been completed in 100% of affected areas after the $8 billion cleanup operation. But he added, what they don't explain is that 70 to 80% of areas such as Namai and Itati, two of the most contaminated districts, are forested mountain, which it is impossible to decontaminate. In areas opened in mid-2017 for people to return, radiation levels will pose a risk until the middle of the next century. These areas are still high in radiation for people to return safely, and it is one reason so few people return. Meanwhile, heavy-handed tactics are being used, with some fearful residents reporting that they have been warned they won't receive lifeline compensation cash if they don't comply. Dr. Kevin Baverstock, a radiation health expert who was at the World Health Organization at the time of the disaster, told Sun Online, for the past 2 years, the Japanese government has encouraged the evacuees to return to their homes, but relatively few people have taken up the offer, even though there is a threat. It may now be a fact that their compensation will cease. Dr. Baverstock says the plant and the areas remain a danger zone for humans. He said it seems that there is no end in sight for the release of radioactive water from the site, and these releases will inevitably put more radioactivity into the food chain if the local waters are fished. Japan seems to have been very successful in controlling radioactivity in foodstuffs to date, but there is still much more radioactivity in the environment around the reactor sites and the regions that were evacuated. And that's the end of the story. We have 1 minute left, and I'm so glad I got that whole story in. This is how it is. 2 billion becquerels from just one unit. They didn't mention the other two, you notice. So, I don't know what the work is. I think the work is on our spirits. I think the work is on helping us to stay happy and realize we can face this and be joyous and still love our lives, because there is still a lot to love about being human. There's still a lot of beautiful things, and we cannot just give up and say, oh, well, it's a big thing. We're not going to stop the chemicals. We're not going to stop the lines in the sky. We're not. You know what? If we put our minds together and focus on finding solutions and demanding solutions in a positive, loving way, we will find solutions, folks. That is the energy of the human spirit. We can find, I'm not saying that all billions of us are going to survive, but you know what? We can save our Mother Earth. We can honor this beautiful living planet that we get to step our feet on every single day. It is up to us to say, we're taking it back. We're sorry, Mother Earth. We're going to do the best we can. We're going to put our courage feet on. We're going to face it and figure out solutions. And we refuse to give up. So we'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Actually, you'll see Jerome tomorrow. So put your courage feet on. Take care.